I've officially just put the finishing touches on my must-draft players for the 2024 fantasy football season. That is a super in-depth article in our draft guide available right now, but I want to get right into the list because these are 5 players that I legitimately think if you build your fantasy football team around this upcoming season, you will win your league. You'll at worst get into the playoffs, and then it's up to you to make the right sit-start decisions, all right? And we're coming pre-tucked, but if you didn't, stand your ass up, tuck it in. Let's get going because Kyren Williams is the first dude I'm about to yap about. And just hear me out. If you don't like a guy on this list, let me hit you with my argument, and then we can argue afterwards. Kyren Williams was one of the most polarizing players this offseason to talk about because the Rams took Blake Corum, the Michigan running back, in the 3rd round. Last year, Kyren Williams single-handedly won people leagues. He was the highest single fantasy football scoring running back on a points-per-game basis outside of Christian McCaffrey. Anyone not named Christian McCaffrey, Kyren Williams was better than, all right? He popped off for 1,350 yards from scrimmage and 15 touchdowns in 12 games. And again, I get it. The elephant in the room, Blake Corum comes to Michigan. Blake Corum is cool. He is fine. He was okay last year coming off of a pretty major knee injury the year before. I don't think he's going to do anything besides put a minor dent in Kyren Williams' workload and operate as a breather back at points. And I think everything that we're hearing inside the Rams locker room and from the Rams front office and from their head coach is echoing that. The GM, Les Snead, says that the Blake Corum pick is so we don't just totally run down Kyren Williams. Sean McVay, when asked about preserving Kyren Williams, saying, knowing what an instrumental part he is going to be of this offense, we want to be smart about that. And so that's where we can be mindful of it. But in the meantime, he's going to lead the way for this running back room. This is not going to be a committee. This is not going to be a 50-50 split to start the year. And I know people are concerned, like, oh, if Kyren doesn't play 90% of the snaps, if he's going to get 98% of the touches, he's all of a sudden just going to be really bad at football. Here's the deal. Kyren played in 12 games last year. He had 4 games. So you're talking about 33% of his games last year. He played fewer than 80% of the snaps. So you're talking about games where he played 77, 72, 69% of snaps. And here were his stats in the games as follows. In games where he played fewer than 80% of snaps, 25 carries, 103 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, 3 catches, 24 yards. 16 carries, 143 rushing yards, 6 catches, 61 receiving yards, 2 touchdowns. 27 carries, 152 yards, 1 rushing touchdown, 5 catches for 3 yards. 22 carries, 104 rushing yards, and a touchdown. So you are talking about going over 100 rushing yards in every single one of those games. You are talking about scoring 6 touchdowns in 4 games. You are talking about catching 14 passes in 4 games, in which he played on fewer than 80% of the team's snaps. When Sean McVay trusts a running back, he trusts a running back. We saw that with Todd Gurley. We have not seen him get a running, like, he hated Cam Akers, bro. He wanted Cam Akers to be good, but he could not trust him for shit, to stay healthy, to stay on the field, to read blocks, all that stuff. And I get it. Again, Blake Corum is scary. He's not. But why don't we try to calm your nerves a little bit here? Let's look at some other running backs over the last 5 years that were drafted in the 3rd round. Kendre Miller, Tank Bigsby, Tyrion Davis-Price, Trey Sermon, Keyshawn Vaughn, Darrington Evans, Royce Freeman. Like, just because someone on Twitter told you that a 3rd round pick was the next big breakout dynasty player does not mean it's true. I would say there's just a start. There's a 50-50 chance that Blake Corum is even going to be a usable NFL running back, right? We saw when they drafted Tank Bigsby last year, a lot of people were up in arms saying that Tank's going to take some workload from Travis Etienne. Tank turned out to be a cone, and Travis Etienne took 90% of the touches. So just to start, I think there's a coin flip chance that Blake Corum's not even good. Now, if he is good, then we start to talk about how much of a workload does he get behind Kyren Williams. The great part about Kyren Williams, and the real reason that I would push people to draft him is this. A lot of the other top backs in fantasy football, we don't have a clear handcuff. If Saquon goes down, it's going to be a committee. We don't even know who the first guy up is. If Jonathan Taylor goes down, it's going to be a committee. We don't know who the first guy up is. If Jahmyr Gibbs goes down, of course, we know it's David Montgomery, but you have to use a 5th, 6th round pick on David Montgomery. The thing with Kyren Williams and Blake Corum is you know who the direct backup is, the one who's going to be the workhorse, and Blake Corum is like a 10th, 11th, 12th round pick in fantasy drafts. The insurance is guaranteed, and the insurance is extremely cheap. So that is the other thing. Like, Kyren Williams, his upside is too high It's too risky to pass on him, given what he can do and what he showed us he could do last year, with the fact that you could just grab Blake Corum as the handcuff, and it's so obviously him right behind him. So if nothing else, take that away. But I will keep fucking going, because another reason the Rams were so good last year is because they had an emergence of their offensive line. They had a dominant run-blocking offensive line. Brandon Thorne, I was listening to the Establish the Run podcast talking about offensive lines. He is like a specialist on the offensive line and the positions. He said that with the free agent signing of former guard for the Lions, Jonah Jackson, this Rams team is in contention to be the second best run blocking unit in the NFL behind only Detroit, okay? It wasn't fluky. Again, McVay's offense always runs smoothly. When he trusts a running back, he trusts a running back. The run blocking line became phenomenal. They have pass catchers to spread the field all over the place. Kyren Williams, Blake Corum, that is the formula. Take Kyren Williams, jump one round ahead of ADP to take Blake Corum, and you could sleep soundly. All right, let's jump into running back number 2. Najee Harris. I know. Last year, he was like the top of our all fade list in our draft guide. And again, you can get our draft guide right now. If you go to Underdog Fantasy, download the Underdog Fantasy app, use promo code BDGE, depositing just $10, right? You can get the draft guide on our website right now, full price, bdge.co. But this is by far and away the least expensive way to get it. Underdog Fantasy app. Promo code BDGE. When you deposit $10 or more, you'll get the draft guide absolutely free. You can obviously play with the $10 that you put onto your account. So you could do 3 best ball drafts to get you really prepared for your drafts. They will give you a free square for week 1. It's Patrick Mahomes over 0.5 passing yards. So as long as he throws 1 passing yard, you are a winner on Underdog Fantasy. And they're giving you a bunch of deposit bonuses when you deposit with our promo code. So you will have more than $10 to play with. So it is the best deal in the industry. It is the best deal in fantasy. I would argue Najee Harris is one of the best deals in fantasy drafts right now, going off the board in the 7th or 8th round. He was, again, the top of our list in the all-fade list last year. He was drafted as a fringe RB1. He ended up finishing as the RB28 in half PPR points per game. But we're here to take another dub on Najee, this time on the good end of the spectrum. Now, similar to Josh Jacobs 2 years ago, the Steelers ended up not picking up the fifth year option for the former first round Najee Harris. And I think that's incentivizing Najee Harris. I don't think I typically read into the it's the contract year narrative. I think there have been people that have kind of looked into this and it doesn't actually motivate, maybe it motivates player, but statistically it hasn't actually shown any sort of improvement in their numbers. But when the actions start to back it up, like for whatever it's worth, apparently Najee is down 10, 15 pounds this offseason and is in a much better conditioning shape. But the points I'm going to make to you right now are that the scheme, the personnel, the offensive line, and the offensive coordinator are major upgrades for Pittsburgh and are the main reasons why I think Najee will succeed. Now, Arthur Smith is coming over as the offensive coordinator, and I know everybody wants to make fun of him, but when he is just solely focused on running an offense and not being a leader of men as a head coach, he is quite good at it, right? Don't get me wrong. He completely missed the mark with the utilization of Bijan Robinson last year. But if we take a look at historically what Arthur Smith has done, don't forget, he was the offensive coordinator in 2019 and 2020 for the Tennessee Titans. Back-to-back years, Derrick Henry went for 1,750 total yards and 8 touchdowns, followed by 2,140 total yards and 17 touchdowns. Those were the 2 years that Arthur Smith was the OC in Tennessee. He got hired by Atlanta to be the head coach the following year, and then he somehow, in that first year, squeezed out over 2,000 yards from scrimmage and 16 touchdowns between Cordarrelle Patterson, Mike Davis, Kadri Allison, and Wayne Gallman, right? And then in 2022, he was able to get Tyler Algier, a 5th-round rookie, to go over 1,000 rushing yards, okay? So again, he missed the mark with Bijan, but let's not forget what the standard typical running back production looks like in an Arthur Smith-led offense. And while the Steelers' offensive line won't be amongst the top pass blocking units, they are phenomenal in the run blocking situation. They have now used back-to-back first-round picks on offensive linemen, right? Broderick Jones last year, Troy Fautanu this year. This year, they also used their first, their second, and their 4th-round pick on offensive line players, okay? Arthur Smith has a very clear direction of how this team wants to operate. And I would argue that, the 2024 Pittsburgh Steelers, their offense and their personnel looks strikingly similar to the Atlanta Falcons 2023. They have 2 good running backs. They have 1 talented single wide receiver, and they have a quarterback that can move around the pocket and sling the ball. Obviously, Russ is better than Desmond Ridder, but that's a positive for Najee. With that team structure last year, the Falcons used 2 tight ends on 46% of their plays last year, the single highest rate in the NFL. When you look at the tight ends on the Steelers, you have Pat Freiermuth and you have Darnell Washington. Do not forget about Darnell Washington, the rookie out of Georgia last year. That dude is like 6'8", 200 and 300 whatever fucking pounds. He is basically an offensive lineman that's really, really athletic. All right. So basically what this is going to do with them utilizing 2 tight ends really heavily, it's going to give Najee an extra blocker on the line of scrimmage, which is really needed because he ran against stacked boxes at the 10th highest rate last year and received the 54th best run blocking offensive line per player profiler. Despite that, Najee played well. He set career highs in yards per carry, and he actually broke off. This actually blew my fucking brains out. He broke off the 4th most explosive runs last year. He had 14 runs of either 10 or 15 yards. I should have done the research more on that. But he had the 4th most runs of either 10 or 15 plus yards in the NFL last year. And like I said, supposedly he dropped some weight. So it seems like he's incentivized and wants to keep that explosive play up. We know Najee is going to get a ton of valuable touches here, right? We know he's going to be the goal line back. Since he has landed in Pittsburgh, he has seen 26 of the 33 running back goal line carries. That is near 80%, all right? He's an 80% goal line guy, and he's going to get all of the carries this year. While I will say it's much murkier in the passing game because Jaylen Warren obviously emerged and he's a phenomenal third down and pass catching back, I would argue the departure of Deontay Johnson is equally, if not more important, to combat the loss of targets to Jaylen Warren. Because Deontay Johnson was a dude who got 140 plus targets year over year, and now they need to fill that hole. And I would bet a large majority of the targets would start to go to the running backs. Remember what Najee did as a rookie? Like, he was such a big utilized piece of the passing game as a rookie. And when I take a look back at Denver last year, right, because Russ is going to be Pittsburgh's quarterback this year, 3 of the 5 most targeted players on Denver last year were running backs, right? Like Courtland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy were 2 of the top 5 most targeted players in Denver last year. And then it was Javonte, Samaje Perine, Jaleel McLaughlin, 3 of the top 5 most targeted players in Denver last year. Russ is going to be dumping the ball off, okay? And just the fact that they have a non-Kenny Pickett player being the quarterback, that's just a huge upgrade to all parties involved. This offense is going to have more security, more stability, more drives, more opportunities, and that is what Najee is going to bring to your fantasy teams this year. So he is the easiest running back 2 pick to anchor your team in fantasy football this year. I want to move over to the tight end position, okay? Trey McBride tops the list for me, okay? Trey McBride I've talked about all offseason. Trey McBride is actually my tight end 1 in my rankings. So people are going to lose their fucking minds, and I get it. There are a lot of good tight ends out there. Sam Laporta coming off an insane rookie season, but Trey McBride is my tight end 1. And again, all of my rankings, PPR, half PPR, standard, super flex, 1 quarterback, they are all on the draft guide, which again, you can get on underdogfantasy.com by using promo code BDGE, depositing $10 or more. The Cardinals thought it was a good idea to have Zach Ertz be their starting tight end for like the first 7 weeks of the season last year. Then Ertz got hurt. Trey McBride came in as a starter and was a fucking revelation down the stretch last year, okay? Here are his 10 games, the splits, as soon as Zach Ertz stopped playing. So Zach Ertz played from weeks 1 to 7, got hurt, and did not step back on the field for the Cardinals. When Trey McBride took over as the full-time tight end for them, he averaged 14.95 PPR fantasy points per game. For context, Travis Kelce was the tight end 1 last year in PPR fantasy points per game. He didn't finish as the overall tight end 1 because he missed a game or 2, but he averaged the single most fantasy points per game at the tight end position with 14.8 PPR points per game. Again, Trey McBride over those final 10 games, 14.95 PPR points per game. Sam Laporta, 13.8 PPR points per game. McBride did this while scoring just 3 times. Laporta scored 10 times. The chemistry between Trey McBride and Kyler Murray was something to behold, all right? Trey McBride's first read rate, meaning plays in which he was the first read to be targeted, 31.8%. which ranked number 1 amongst the tight end position in the NFL by a wide margin. Of course, I get it. Drafting the all-world prospect of Marvin Harrison Jr., 4th overall, can't go unspoken. Marv is a once-in-a-decade prospect. He's going to command 130-plus targets out of the gate. But the Cardinals will enter the year with the 6th most vacated targets in the NFL, all right? They have a shitload of targets that need to be filled. A lot of them are going to go to Marvin Harrison Jr., but there is room for both McBride and MSJ to fill their plates and then eat together. This is going to be an extremely condensed passing game. You have Kyler Murray 2 years removed from the ACL, operating again as one of the world's best playmakers, and we love condensed offenses, right? We love when only 2-3 guys are getting targets, and that is what it's going to be in Arizona. McBride is a red zone monster. If he sees an uptick in touchdowns, if he goes just from like 3 to 7, you're talking about an elite fantasy tight end. So I absolutely love Trey McBride, and I'm going to give you another tight end a little bit further down the list in case you miss out on him, and that is Jake Ferguson of the Dallas Cowboys. I think he is the easiest, like, no-brainer tight end one that's going tight end like 8 to 10, 11 in that area, all right? When we look at the story of the Cowboys last year, both teammates, Dak and CeeDee, went nuts after their bye, right? They had a huge philosophy change following their Week 7 bye, and that is where Dak was the quarterback 1 for the rest of the season. CeeDee Lamb was the wide receiver 1 for the remainder of the season. But why don't we take a look at Jake Ferguson's splits after their Week 7 bye as well? On the left side, you could see the 11 games following the bye where he was averaging nearly 12 PPR fantasy points per game. Like, he came into last year, he was a fun sleeper that was actually also on our must-draft list last year. He ended up developing into an every-week starter down the stretch. A sophomore season, 71 catches, 765 yards, 5 touchdowns. That's the other thing to keep in mind. Jake Ferguson's really young. This was just his second year. He's going into his third year. And here's a tweet that I ripped off yesterday. If you're not following me on Twitter, make sure that you do so. The list of tight ends since the year 2000 that have posted a 70 catch, 700 yard, 5 touchdown line in either their rookie or sophomore season. Listen to these names: Gronk, Antonio Gates, Jimmy Graham, Sam Laporta, Aaron Hernandez, Chris Cooley, Jason Witten, George Kittle, Jake Ferguson. End of list. If Jake Ferguson had mixed in a few more scores during the regular season, like he ended with 5 touchdowns, we'd be looking at him in a totally different light. 5 touchdowns was not due to lack of involvement. Jake Ferguson led all NFL tight ends in red zone targets, 25 red zone targets per playerprofiler.com, okay? So if he had some more touchdowns, and it doesn't count for fantasy, but he exploded. Like, we saw all that. People want to talk about regression all the time. This is like the best case for that. It was just unlucky the week that it came in. In their wild card loss, the Dallas wild card loss to Green Bay, Jake Ferguson caught 10 balls for 93 yards and scored 3 times. Had that game come in the regular season, he would have been an elite fantasy option. So you want to talk about condensed offenses and condensed passing games, like, look no further than the Dallas Cowboys. They have an aging Brandon Cooks at their wide receiver 2. They have no real wide receiver 3. They don't have a pass-catching running back of consequence. Like, this is going to run through CeeDee Lamb and Jake Ferguson, and I'm expecting this passing offense to be both high volume, extremely condensed, which is a great cocktail for fantasy. Ferguson, again, just 25 years old, entering year 3 as a pro. With a little bit of touchdown luck, I think we could be looking at a top 5 fantasy scorer at the tight end position. And number 5 on this list, we're just kind of jumping all over the place, but I figured I needed to throw a wide receiver on here to satisfy all parties and all needs, etc. But again, in the draft guide, we have our must-draft list for every single position. So no matter what you're looking for, we got someone in there. The last guy up on this list is Nico Collins, the Houston Texans alpha wide receiver. His profile screams elite so loudly it'll make Skip Bayless sound like a fucking introvert, all right? In his first year, catching passes from a real NFL caliber QB, caught 80 passes for 1,300 yards and 8 touchdowns in 15 games, all right? His success was not an accident, right? Like, having Stroud, the rookie of the year, the offensive rookie of the year, throwing in passes obviously helped. But when you look at Nico by himself, by just almost every metric you could find, he was a super alpha, all right? Matt Harmon did his reception perception profile, which is a great tool you can go find on receptionperception.com. 94th percentile success rate versus man coverage, 96th percentile success rate versus press coverage. Those numbers rival the league's absolute top wide receivers. Last year, Collins ranked number 1 in the league in fantasy points per target versus man coverage, number 2 in overall yards per route run, and most impressively, like, the biggest pop to his game was how good Collins was after the catch. He had the 6th most yards after the catch. He had a 30% broken plus missed tackles force rate, which was like legitimately Deebo Samuel, Greg Dortch, another guy or two like that, and then Nico Collins. When you're 6'4", 215 pounds, you should not be able to move the way that he does. And I get it. The concern for Nico and like being able to push past the numbers that he had last year. Again, I would say he missed 2 games, so it could have been even better. It is valid because they have Stephon Diggs coming in, and they have Tank Dell, who broke out as a rookie as well. I think Diggs is still a high-quality starting wide receiver, but he's not the same downfield separator that he was his early years in Buffalo, as you could see by his reception perception profile, which used to just be 90s down the board. And I would also argue this, dude. Like, Nico Collins, while he played limited games, and he had an incredible amount of success last year, he played on just 68.2% of Houston's snaps. Call me crazy, but I think the guy that they just gave $72 million to is going to play more than 2/3 of their snaps this time around. It's also important to remember, like, Bobby Slowick, who was the offensive coordinator last year, did not leave. He decided to stay, although he probably could have got a head coaching job elsewhere. And they went very run heavy on first downs and neutral game scripts. I think that for sure swaps over and goes extremely pass heavy early on downs. But when you look at Bobby Slowick's offense, which he was the previous passing game coordinator for the 49ers, aka the Kyle Shanahan offense, you look at these offenses historically that have used guys like Andre Johnson as the one. They've used guys like Julio Jones as the one. Even like Pierre Garçon had that 170 target season. Nico Collins is playing that X receiver role that saw Julio, Andre, Pierre Garçon get 170 plus targets in a season. Nico is just an all-around wide receiver that makes plays in the air, makes plays downfield, makes plays after the catch. He is attached to one of the league's up-and-coming breakout superstars, so I'm confident in saying that Nico, he's priced accordingly. I think he is, without a doubt, the Texans wide receiver to own in fantasy football. Everybody wants to talk about, like, I like Diggs more, or I like Tank more because of their value. Just get the latest one. I just think Nico is like the all-around alpha receiver that's going to continue to break the fuck out everywhere, all right? Everybody on this list, I think, will anchor the shit out of your fantasy team and help you build a league-winning type beats, all right? But if you agree, if you disagree, let me know down below. But most importantly, if you want to support the brand, make sure you hit the button that looks like this, subscribe to the channel, and go grab that draft guide live August 1st. You can grab it on BDGE.co at full price, but the cheapest way is by hitting Underdog Fantasy and using this code, promo code BDGE, when depositing $10 or more. You'll get the bonuses, you'll get the free square, but you'll get the draft guide, which is most important. I love y'all. I'm out. Smoochies.